There we go. All right, great. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining. Leo Kowalski, Director of Programming with the PA Solar Center. We'll talk a little bit about what the PA Solar Center is for folks who are unfamiliar, and a little bit about the Get Solar program, which is the reason we're having this conversation. I have right here on this slide, really important deadline, Monday, January 30th, 2023. We'll be mentioning that deadline a few more times. That is the application deadline for any businesses and nonprofits that are interested, or landowners, I should say, pretty much non-residential solar opportunities that are interested in applying to this program. That's the deadline for application, so that we can grab all those applications, make sure we have all the information we need from your organizations, and get you into this RFP process where we can get solar developers to bid on your solar proposals. So that's again a date we'll be talking about a little bit more, and I'll explain a little bit more about that process of bringing in the applications and getting the solar proposals. But just for now, keep that deadline in mind. PA Solar Center right now is 4 individuals. Myself, the Director of Programming, which is Get Solar program, which we're going to be talking about today largely. It's our main vehicle, excuse me. And we have Sharon Pillar, our Founder Director. Sharon and Matt Mahoney, our Director of Government Affairs, work specifically in education and outreach and policy work. So one of the main drivers that makes solar financially viable and productive for individuals is state policy, federal policy as well, but really state policy is a huge influencer in how solar can be implemented. And unfortunately, Pennsylvania is a little bit behind our neighbors. Well, I should say quite a lot behind our neighbors, neighboring states. Policy was set over 20 years ago, and it was progressive and dynamic at the time, but it's not really been changed since then. So we definitely have a lot of good work being done by Sharon and Matt to educate policymakers and decision makers across the state on what revenue positive economic benefits gained by improving our solar policy statewide. Gretchen Dugalecki is our communications consultant. We're actually hiring 2 new positions to support the Get Solar program right now. I can include that information, but it is on our website as well. If folks are interested in applying or sharing with folks that they know that might be a good fit. Our program has been very successful. This volunteer effort by folks at McCandless is a big piece of that. So we're growing and expanding and trying to help more folks go solar. Our mission and vision at the Solar Center is that the state of Pennsylvania becomes a leader in renewable energy through rapid and broad expansion of in-state solar generation, and that we want all Pennsylvanians to share in the clean energy economy to create more resilient communities. And when we talk about all Pennsylvanians sharing this, it's a really big component of how we approach what we do. It's all well and good that solar goes up and that large utility scale solar can transplant some of the other energy generation sources that are maybe on their way out for various reasons, economics, environmental benefits. But really, we want everybody to have access to this technology and have access to the benefits of it, the economic benefits of it, the community benefits. And solar is a really wonderful technology because it's so scalable. I mean, you can put a single solar panel on a shed or a chicken coop. You can put thousands of solar panels up in a utility scale solar installation in the field. You can put a handful of panels on a house. You can put them on anything. So it's a really wonderful technology. It's very versatile, very accessible. And it's one of the reasons we really love what we do and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to share that. The Solar Center works basically through 3 pillars. And we kind of in reverse order here, I'll work the policy, education, and advocacy network, what I described earlier. That's really reaching out to folks that develop the policy of the state and helping them understand what solar can do. The solar industry is an enormous industry for growth. It's a huge potential in the future. Pennsylvania actually has quite a lot of solar industry professionals, and it has a lot of solar industry opportunities. But we really want to make sure that economic benefit is shared, increased, and specifically shared across the entire state. So there's an enormous amount of solar activity in the eastern side of the state, not so much in the western central parts of the state, though we have a lot here in Allegheny County. Once you move out of Allegheny County, there's not a lot of solar installation, there's not a lot of solar installers. And so there's a huge opportunity economically for jobs, for businesses, manufacturing, the whole silo. So we want to make sure that our state policymakers are aware of that and are making legislation that supports those opportunities. And we also are a online resource hub. So we provide all our resources for residents, businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, from guidebooks to just form to ask questions and get answers, to directory of solar installers and solar industry professionals, so that you can come to our website and have access to that information that's collated in one spot, because it can actually be quite difficult to find information about solar if you're looking as a resident or a business owner to find even a solar installer maybe in your region. This resource hub will be able to help you do that. And then, of course, walking the walk, we'll make sure that we're actually doing our part to get more solar out there. And that's really what the Get Solar program is all about. And we're going to talk about extent right now. So far, the Get Solar program has queued up. This actually is a little information, because the first round of the Get Solar Communities program brought in 22 additional projects. So we actually have about 50 projects that have been submitted to us that we've been working on to help those organizations find solar. And those are businesses, nonprofits, municipalities. Again, we don't really work with residential customers. So it's quite an enormous amount of solar that we've been engaged with and trying to find solutions for. We had 6 projects come through a queue so far that are completed, which doesn't seem maybe like a lot relative to 31 projects incoming, but it's actually quite a high hit rate for solar industry. And some of these projects that are in our queue are just sort of on a longer timeline. Solar could take a little while to go up. The variety of reasons, financing, those kinds of things that make the process a little bit more elongated, especially before the Inflation Reduction Act, when financing for nonprofits, which tends to be one of our larger constituents, financing for nonprofits has been challenging in the past because they're unable to benefit, or were unable to benefit, from tax benefits that are a huge driver of the solar finance. But that represented $3.2 million of private commercial investment, which is really exciting. That's a fair amount of money, and we're definitely working to dramatically increase that over the next couple of years. And what we do with the Get Solar program is kind of 3 phases. We conduct outreach and education so that we identify businesses and nonprofits that are interested in going solar and maybe don't know where to start, so that our program can support them. In this program, the Get Solar McCandless project, folks like Tony have been instrumental in doing the outreach and education, working within their social network. I mean, folks that have the solar opportunity that we're not aware of, people like Tony are tapped into and can support, bring them to the program so they know that it exists. That's been a huge lift, huge opportunity. It allows us to reach so many more organizations. Once we have organizations that are interested in going solar, and this is really the thrust of what this presentation is about and what our program is for, we curate those project proposals from start to finish. So, you're an organization interested in going solar, we gather information about your rooftop, your electricity usage, any of the information about your transformers, that kind of stuff. Anything that's relevant to a solar installation, we help you identify all those needs, we collate it for you, and then we put out a request for proposals, a one-stop shop for everyone in the Get Solar round. So all the organizations that would submit applications for Get Solar McCandless, we'll take all of those applications and submit them at the same time to the regional solar developers that work in this area. And we're requesting them to provide us with designs on the solar, but also financial models, specifically for nonprofit organizations that might require some more complicated methodologies. We ask the developers to provide all of that to us in a nice, neat package. We add some tools to help you analyze the economics and to walk you through what it looks like to actually move through solar, and the financial benefits, and the cost, the different types of financing you can use. And yeah, so that's really bullet point 3 is, once we have those project proposals, we bring that back to you and we help you walk through and understand what you're looking at and organize everything in a meaningful way, so that you don't have to sink a ton of your time and energy into understanding it. We're pretty much doing all that work for you. We're an unbiased nonprofit, so our goal is to present you with the information, to have those developers provide it to us so that we can make it easier for you to unpack, but we're not here to help you make a decision in the sense that we would give you advice or tell you which way to go. I mean, it's definitely up to you. We just want to make sure that you have the tools to understand what's available. Our objectives with this Get Solar Community Program was to identify up to five Western PA communities. We had 4 that came into the queue, and that would be your McCandless, Indiana Borough, and Indiana County, Carnegie, and Wilkinsburg. So this is the second of these webinars that we're doing. We're going to have Carnegie and Wilkinsburg ahead of us, but we'll be releasing those applications and the RFPs staggered over time so that the solar developers in the area aren't overwhelmed with all these projects. But our goal is really just to prove that this program can increase trust in the system and decrease the time making that goes into going solar, and just improve the confidence for organizations to pull this trigger, to trust that solar is a good opportunity. And right now, with the way finances are and the way prices are, solar is a really great opportunity. So we just really want to make folks understand how easy it is and how easy it could be. And we definitely want to increase regional economic development. We want to support local businesses that are doing the installation. We want to help local businesses and nonprofits save money on their electricity bills so they can move that into things that support their mission and their goals. And we want to make sure that this stuff is happening over a long period of time. Solar is really wonderful because solar module right now has a warranty, typically manufacturer's warranty of 30 years. Solar installation can survive a lot longer than that in good conditions. So you could have a productive solar installation on your business or your nonprofit for 50 years. And that's really exciting. So it's a long-term decision, but we're also trying to do this in a way where you receive some of those financial benefits as soon as possible. And we're trying to set some goals. May or may not mean anything for folks on the call, but we try to have each community see about 1 megawatt of installed solar by the end of the year, which that actually could probably be knocked away sometimes in one project. Like if you imagine a large manufacturer, which one of our previous rounds brought in by itself, put up 1 megawatt of solar. So this is just kind of a benchmark. Ideally, we'd like to see several organizations go through and we achieve that megawatt or more by virtue of having a lot of organizations go through this. Now's a great time to go solar. As I mentioned earlier, the utility costs, and I probably don't need to tell you folks, have gone way up in the last year. And while there will probably be some settling of that cost in the near future, it's certainly not going to go back to where it was. And in the arc of electricity costs is always that they increase. Just never not been true. So generally over time, you model that it's going to increase roughly 3% per year. And that obviously comes not necessarily in an even straight 3% increase every year. And sometimes you have these dramatic 40 or 50 or 60% increases like we did last year. But they're as high as they've ever been, and quite frankly, much higher. And that is certainly a pain point for a lot of organizations. The other thing that's happened recently is the Inflation Reduction Act was passed last year, and that has significantly increased the opportunity to benefit from the main vehicle for solar finance, which is the tax benefits. So the solar tax credit, which we'll talk about in a moment, that was increased from 26% to 30%. There's some additional provisions depending on the location of the solar array and some other details. And again, we'll talk about this, that could increase that 30% to 40, 50, 60%. And there's also an opportunity for nonprofits now to take a direct payment from the federal government in lieu of that tax benefit that they can't receive. So now nonprofit organizations can benefit from the equivalency of those tax benefits. That's an enormous change. That really can't be overstated how significant of a change that is for previous opportunities to finance solar for a nonprofit organization. I mentioned this here. It's not really as relevant for McCandless because of the requirements for what a rural community is for the USDA. But if you're an agricultural producer, so if you're a greenhouse or any other organization that makes, I think 51% of your revenue from agricultural products, USDA REAP grant is a huge opportunity. I actually should up this number because it typically is 25%, but this year and fairly recently, the USDA announced that they're increasing this grant to 40%, and they increased dramatically the amount of organizations that they're going to be providing the grant to because they received a ton of money from the Inflation Reduction Act. So agri producers in this call, or agri producers that you're aware of, huge opportunity to save a ton of money on your solar system this year specifically. But USDA REAP grants are available every year. Again, this year though, they have a ton of money, so it's a really good opportunity. And then there's financing methods, bank loans. There's organizations that are very good at solar finance, and they're very they're used to the dynamic of receiving that tax benefit for businesses. So they structure their loans accordingly, so you're not paying interest on money that you're going to be paying back, within a couple months. There's a lot of that out there, and we'll help organizations find it. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but here's a chart just kind of showing the future of this dynamic. As you're probably aware, the electricity rates increased, and a big element of it is fluctuation in the oil and natural gas markets. Now, we're not the Solar Center. We're not really in the business of talking ill of other energy sources, but one thing we do have concerns about is having one energy source be the primary way that we generate electricity. And if you look at this chart, what it's showing us is that natural gas is going to eventually be about 70% of our electricity generation, which means any volatility in that market will dramatically impact the price of electricity. And we're seeing an element of that today, as recently as last year. But if we keep going in this trend, we're going to really, really feel the impact of changes in that price. Obviously, it could go down. Again, I don't see that being very likely. Prices very rarely go down. But the nice thing about solar is once solar is installed, the price of the sun is free. You really can't commodify it once it's there. So solar is a really wonderful energy generations resource because it has that element to it. It's also very active during peak hours when electricity is at its most expensive in every utility market in the world, basically. Solar is operating at its prime efficiency. So more solar in the grid would be great for price stabilization. And I think we all feel the need to do that. So tax benefits, I mentioned this before. Tax benefits, basically there's two things working here. The first is the ITC, the federal tax, pardon me, the federal solar investment tax credit. This is a tax credit dollar to dollar on your federal income tax for your business or organization. And that's 30% right now. So if you install a solar installation and you do your taxes the following year, you can claim up to 30% of the total cost of that system back in that dollar to dollar credit. This was set to decline prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. It was going to be 22%. Now it's 30%. That's fixed for 10 years, which is awesome. But they also added these additional riders. Here, you three point out that tend to be relevant in this area. There's the domestic content bonus. So it's outlined in the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're waiting on some more rulemaking on what this actually looks like when you're claiming the benefit in your taxes. And that should come fairly soon from the federal government, but a certain amount of domestic content needs to be in the solar installation to get this additional 10% bonus. Energy communities are outlined, again, mention the bill. We need a little bit more information about how this is actually going to be enacted, but a lot of Western PA qualifies, and it's very likely that there are organizations on this call that do. So that's an additional 10% for being in one of these energy communities, which are communities that have been impacted by the disappearance of the energy infrastructure that used to be the energy industry infrastructure that used to be in the state. So post coal, post steel mill, those kind of things qualify a lot of the communities here as being an energy community. And if you're in a low income area or your organization serves low income individuals primarily, you can qualify for another 10%. So those are the big three. There are other pieces, but these are the ones we think will likely be relevant. You don't need to figure this out. Again, part of our process and generally working with solar installers is that they're going to do the work and we're going to do the work to figure out what you qualify for. As with anything or any piece of advice, when we're talking about taxes, you really want to work with a qualified tax professional. I know it's not tax advice, but we can kind of guide you in the right direction. And the note down here at the bottom, elective payments. This was what I was talking about with nonprofits. Tax exempt organizations can now receive a direct payment from the federal government based on these tax benefits that they would receive if they were for-profit entities. All right. The other main tax vehicle is modified accelerated cost recovery system, or makers. So this is just a form of equipment depreciation. If you own a business or you've worked for a business previously, you're probably familiar with this. If you have equipment that helps you run your organization, you can depreciate it on your taxes typically. If you have the tax appetite to do it, solar works just like that, but you can do the full depreciation in the first year. You can do it on a 5-year schedule if that's where you're if that's more beneficial for your taxation, but you can claim the full benefit in the first year. And depending on your tax bracket, this could be another 20% on your installation costs. It's a little harder to estimate, obviously. Again, you have to contact a tax professional, but for for-profit entities, it's a really nice way to just recover more of that system's value back. And you can start to see with these different tax benefits and with potentially like a REAP grant, something like that, how the savings, the cost recovery you have for your solar installation can really stack up. So we're talking about a significant reduction in the upfront price tag in a solar installation. I'll go through this very quickly because, again, I think it's probably not relevant to a lot of organizations in this community, but if there are ag producers, I want to mention it, or nonprofits in that similar space. USDA has 2 programs that are relevant, one for nonprofits, one for for-profits. That's the Community Facilities Program and the Rural Energy for America, or REAP program. Community facilities hits all levels of municipal government, charitable, nonprofits, schools, libraries, any organization that's deemed to provide community service and is deemed a necessary benefit to the community. These grants can be up to 55% of the total project cost, and they do provide direct loans. So the USDA will actually provide some pretty significant loan opportunities, and both in terms of fairly low interest rates that are fixed rate and incredibly long useful life. 25-year loan is pretty incredible for any equipment loan, but certainly one that generates income. You get a grant plus that fixed long-term loan, and you can imagine it's very easy to get to profitable system the first year. Rural Energy for America program, REAP, mentioned again. This is now up to 40% of the project cost this year, and the maximum award is now $1 million, not $500,000 for an energy project. So that's obviously very significant. Nearly $2 million project could be reduced basically in half. They do provide a guaranteed loan. It's not the same as a direct loan. They don't provide the money themselves, but they do work with local banking institutions to guarantee loans. So if you are an ag producer working with a financial institution that has never done a solar loan before, the USDA will come in and guarantee that loan so that institution feels confident exploring solar for the first time. The first application deadline this year for REAP is the 31st. There's several deadlines throughout the year, but it's always to your benefit to get in the first round. You have the maximum opportunity to be funded. Loans, this is pretty straightforward, but it's very, very common in the solar world and for organizations pursuing solar to take on loans as part of the financing package. Again, solar is basically a piece of equipment that generates income. So you can kind of model this very easily on what am I paying right now? What am I going to pay over the next several years? Factor in your tax benefits, and you can usually get a loan structured so that your savings from that solar system in terms of defrayed energy costs, energy that you're not buying from the utility company, is a higher benefit than the loan payment that you would be paying out on that schedule. That's a fairly common practice. And businesses, and if you're representing a business, you're definitely familiar with exploring IRR. You're making a decision on what your rate of return is going to be, and that's one way that we're going to look at this too when we're exploring solar plus loans. For nonprofits, specifically nonprofits providing community service in this region, we, the Solar Center, worked with the Heinz Endowment and Bridgeway Capital to devise a revolving loan fund for nonprofits. So Bridgeway Capital is providing the loan to the loan servicer. Heinz Endowment gave them $1 million, $1 million grant to service this loan. Basically, this is meant to supply that financing financing schedule that would allow a nonprofit to take that benefit, that elect or direct payment from the federal government, any other grants or money that they could find, package that with a loan that gets them to being cash positive or cash neutral on their solar installation year one. The goal here is to make solar revenue positive, a positive decision financially for a nonprofit, rather than something that they have to wait a couple years, several years to make their money back on. We really want to make it easier for nonprofit organizations to go solar and for it to be a net benefit immediately. Folks are interested, we can definitely provide more information, connect you with the folks at Bridgeway. The point of this being a loan fund rather than just grant money is once we're able to help your organization kind of finance your solar, and as you pay that loan back, that money goes into the fund to help the next organization. And ideally, we'll be looking at bringing in more foundation support, more organizations to back this program as it gets off the ground, because then we just have a lot more money to help nonprofits, and this could become a very stable vehicle to make sure that nonprofit organizations in this region can find their way to solar. Another loan program I want to mention, which is really great, is through the Sustainable Energy Fund. So all the utility organizations, all the utility companies across the state have some kind of sustainable energy fund, but this is a statewide one. They're providing a really excellent loan, again, in terms of that amortization schedule, specifically up to 20 years, which is, again, phenomenal. Very easy to make solar, pay out year one when you can take a loan out to 20 years. You may or may not want to do that, but it gives you flexibility. They'll finance 100% of the solar project up to $100,000 per loan application, which will cover quite a lot of solar systems, especially when you're factoring in these other benefits that you might have. So it's a really great program, available typically year round. There's not much more to say about it, but I can definitely connect you with folks from the Sustainable Energy Fund if this is of interest to you. And again, when we're working through this program with you and you submit your application, we're going to provide you all this information. We're going to work with you one-on-one. But if you want to explore these things in advance, we're happy to provide this information to you. And I'll be sending out the slides to everybody so that you'll be able to pull out these web links and the phone numbers to contact. So for nonprofits specifically, you could technically do this as a for-profit entity, but it really doesn't make as much sense given your ability to commodify those tax benefits. But a kind of classic thing that's done in the industry is called a long-term power purchase agreement. So with the power purchase agreement, we have a three-party arrangement between the host organization, the nonprofit, the solar developer who's doing the installation and would be monitoring the system for its productivity over time, and then the third-party entity that's just serving as an investor. So they're basically going to be the on-paper owner of the solar installation, and they're leasing your property to put their installation on. And then you're going to buy the energy from them or agree to buy the energy from them for as long as 30 years, typically 25, 30 years. Sometimes it can be 20. And there are clauses that you could buy the system out somewhere after 6-year mark. But the advantage of this structure is that for the nonprofit organization, you're not spending any money. The investor is providing all the upfront cost, and they're going to share in the revenue from the solar energy production, and they're also going to be benefiting from that tax, all those tax benefits. They're the entity that's going to claim that tax credit and the depreciation, and they're going to pass some of that savings on to you. So while you won't have a complete reduction in your electricity rate the way you would if you owned the solar and it was feeding directly into your meter, you will receive typically a discounted rate, over the course, a fixed rate over that 25, 30 years. Another benefit of it is that investor and the solar developer are responsible for the maintenance of that system and the operations of it. They have a significant financial investment in making sure that produces power, so they're going to make sure that it's operating at its full capacity and that it gets its regularly scheduled maintenance. And then again, you could structure it and typically have the structure to buy, spend a cash value after 5-year mark, year 6 typically, 6 or 7, so that the IRS is satisfied that the original owner owned it as long as they need to, and then you can become the full owner and get the full benefit. And there's a lot of organizations like schools, large medical facilities, organizations that benefit from the structure because they don't necessarily want to put upfront money, but even that marginal benefit on their electricity can be a big deal. For example, CCAC, the North Campus, which is in McCandless, was one of our first projects that we worked with the solar center. This is a 540 kilowatt system that's installed and operational as of last year, and they were going to save, in the original estimate, it was about $800,000. With prices going up significantly last year, that expectation has grown significantly. So we imagine they're probably going to save north of $1 million now. Certainly, again, it's predicted model, but you can see how, having invested no money, that they're very happy with the possibility of saving $1 million over the next 25 years. The main thing I'm trying to get here is going solar can be very simple. Get Solar Program's Unbiased Project. We're a trusted nonprofit organization of solar experts. So when you submit your application to us, you can trust that folks working on it are folks who have been in this industry that understand what they're doing and will take that burden off of you, because it can be complicated. I mean, we just covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. This is all the kind of information that you'd have to research, you'd have to figure out on your own. And we want to take that off your hands so you can focus on optimizing what your business and your nonprofit actually does and what you want to be doing. There's no obligation or contracts to participate in the Get Solar program. We typically have like a $50, $75 fee for organizations, but we waive that as part of the communities program. And if we do work with solar developers to get completed projects down the road, we ask those solar developers to donate to the solar center, for bringing them shovel-ready projects and facilitating an easy process for them as well, because they're not spending the time and energy trying to curate these organizations for their part of their sales force. We're helping bring projects that are ready to go to their door. Pardon me, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so my voice is starting to fail me now. This is what the first page of our application looks like. This can be found on our website. I can provide this to folks through email. Our application, again, is due January 30th for any organizations on this call, any organizations part of the Get Solar McCandless program. What we need from you is a copy of your recent electricity bill. That'll typically show 12 months of data if you provide us the whole bill. That's really all we need. We're going to be able to understand how much you pay for your electricity, how much you use, which is really the 2 data points we need there. Any documentation you have about your roof's health and maintenance is really important. If you have a roof that is going to need to be replaced in 10 years, you don't want to put a piece of equipment on top of it that needs to be there for 30 years generating electricity, because if that solar system has to come down for you to replace your roof, that's going to cost money, and that's going to eat into the value of the solar significantly. So you definitely don't want to do that. We just want to make sure your roof is in a condition that makes sense to install solar. And if it's not, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When you're replacing a roof, it's a very good time to explore solar for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that when you install a roof with a reflective surface, you can put bifacial solar panels that collect, solar modules that collect sunlight from both sides of the module, which means when they're on a reflective surface, that light's bouncing up on the surface, hitting the panels in the back of the panel, and then producing electricity that way as well. So it's a more efficient system. Also means that there's some opportunity to collect tax value on the rooftop because it's part of the energy system. That is definitely a conversation for tax professionals, and there are solar developers in this region that specialize in that kind of construct. So if you are an organization that needs to repair a roof, don't be dismayed. This might be a good time to do it. If you provide us with blueprints, photographs, all that stuff, it's really valuable to have that up front. We will, through this process, and I'll be describing this momentarily, we will be facilitating on-site visits for the solar developers. So they'll be able to gather some of this information, but everything that we can get in advance is good. It gives us a lot more, it gives us an advantage and saves some time in the back end. So if you're, again, interested in at least even learning more, you can go to our website, psolarcenter.org, go to the Get Solar McCandless landing page, and it'll have all the information you need there. You can email me, leo@psolarcenter.org, as well for questions or just set up time to talk. I say this all the time, and I'm happy to say it until my schedule is gummed up, which it hasn't been yet. If you want to talk to me personally, I'm happy to set aside 30 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour to talk to you about your solar potential, what you want to do. So reach out to me whenever. We'll set up a time, we'll talk. You can also just fill out a pre-qualification survey on that website landing page I just showed you. This is just really high level information about your organization, your solar goals. This just gets you on my radar and lets me take a look at your property on Google Maps to see what your high level solar potential is. And we can send that back to you and say, this is about the size of solar installation you could do. This is typically what this would cost roughly on a project like yours if there's no other obstacles that we don't see. And I can give you a little bit of information you need to make a decision, or at least a sense of what you'd be dealing with. Again, we do all the work with the solar developers on your behalf so that you don't have to deal with it. I mean, obviously there's points where they'll have questions we'll have to pass through, but we make sure that this is clean and easy for you and that they're all getting the same information and that we can facilitate a very simple process for you to get those proposals back in. I mentioned I'll have some critical dates at the end, but March 13th is, if you submit your application on the 30th of January, we'll have these proposals back by the 13th of March. And then shortly after that, we'll pass it on to you once we've made sure that all the materials are there and all the developers provided us with all the same numbers that we need to show you, an actual apples to apples comparison. And again, this is just this is an early example of one of the documents that we use when constantly updating these. But basically, we have all of the different components of the solar installation you need to look at: the cost, the size, how much energy it's going to produce, the installation cost per watt installed, and how much energy it's going to offset, all that stuff. We put that side by side, so it's very easy for you to analyze your proposals at a high level. You'll be getting the full proposal as well, all the other information that those developers provide, and they certainly have selling points beyond just the raw financials, but this is a very good way to get a sense of what you're dealing with at a glance and to be able to share that internally with folks that might not have the same level of sophistication and understanding the finance of solar. This makes it very easy to explain to other people in your organization. And again, we're going to work with you based off of these numbers, based off of your goals, to find a roadmap to financing these systems. Important dates, again, January 30th, 2023. Really need to have your application materials in at that time so that we can get you through the process. We have a very tight schedule after that point, and we have several communities, which we expect to have probably 40-50 projects coming through. So it's super important that folks get us what we need on these deadlines so that we can move through this and get everybody back to proposals in time. February 6th would be when we release that request for proposals on your behalf. So that's a week later. Again, there's really not a lot of margin for error there. And March 13th is when we get those proposals back, so that if you're interested in moving forward with solar, that gives you plenty of time to get a solar installation at least contracted by the end of the year, so that you can, if you're for-profit or nonprofit, you can make sure that you're receiving that tax benefit or those direct payments in 2024. You do not necessarily want to push that to 2024 if you're ready to do this, because then you don't want to push the installation to contract to next year, because then you're waiting a whole nother year to get your tax benefit. So this is definitely an appropriate timeline to get things done. It can take a little while, even if you're ready to sign on the dotted line today. It could still take several months for all the permitting and engineering reports, all the stuff that the solar developers do on your behalf. All that has to get done before they can legally install, and then they need to order the equipment. So there are things that could make this process go a little longer than you would like. The actual install is easily the shortest component of it. Depending on the size of the system, that could be a couple weeks. But we just want to give ourselves a runway to accomplish this year. All right, well, thank you so much for just listening to me going on about this. As much as I love doing it, I know it's a lot to take in. But now we definitely want to open up for folks to ask questions, to talk a little bit about it. I think we're fairly ahead of schedule, about 40 minutes on the call. We don't need to use all of it, obviously, but I'm happy to stay here and talk as long as folks are interested.
Great job, Leo. Thanks for all the info. We did have, I guess we had some interest related to nonprofits. So I know we have the investment tax credit, but can you speak to any other potential incentives or credits or anything related to the nonprofits, municipalities and things like that?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. There are other things out there for-profits as well. So in previous slides, I've listed, every single possible financial benefit that you could get at that year. And I think it just kind of, if it's not relevant to you, it can kind of cause you to gloss over a little bit. And so we wanted to really pinpoint on all of the shared financial components that everybody has. But there's things like the small business tax credit, or small business advantage grant rather. So small businesses, and that's categorical. So you could have a manufacturer that has really high point of revenue and 200 employees, but for your category, you're a small business. That's a $5,000 grant that you can get for installing solar, and it's very straightforward. You apply, meet the criteria, you get the grant. And that money comes and goes. I think I'm gonna say it's the DEP provides that, or the G.E.T. But there are definitely grants that pop up for businesses and nonprofits. There's a Clean Air Energy Fund. There's all kinds of things that pop up. So we typically explore that stuff with individuals in the conversation that's relevant to them. There's really wild, nuanced grants that pop up federal level, like for libraries. There's a solar library grant that pops up every year. So there's just little things that we can explore that might make sense for your organization, and we don't typically get into that extent in these conversations because it might be relevant to one entity on the call. But yeah, there's money out there. And I mentioned the Sustainable Energy Fund. Well, we've worked with organizations that have received grants from, like, the West Penn Power Sustainable Energy Fund. There's a Penelec Sustainable Energy Fund. The Duquesne Light and Penn Power have their own things. There's also a solar rebate program through most of these utilities. So the year that the solar installs its first year of productivity, it's not an enormous amount of money, but it's a couple percentage points that you can get back in a rebate from the utility company through a solar installation. So again, there's a lot of stuff out there, and we'll sketch out that roadmap with you. And I'm happy to provide the information to folks, even if they don't submit an application. It's just very difficult to cover all of it in one conversation.
Good point. I think so. In general, we have with the 30% tax credit. Now that was sort of a cash back for nonprofits, that's at the very bare minimum. A nonprofit could take advantage of the 30% investment tax credit. And then some of the loans available, and like you said, there might be a few grants available as well. That's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, let's say. And then if you're interested in a kind of a zero money down situation, you might want to think about a power purchase agreement.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, and thank you. Sorry, really quickly, Kelly, thank you so much for answering all these questions and moderating the conversation in the chat. It's very hard to do both when you're presenting, so I really appreciate that. And I'm looking at some of the other questions, so I'll cover those really quickly. I see Jack asked about the roof benefit applying to new construction. Absolutely does. So, and there's, for new construction, a lot of reasons you want to look at solar at the design phase. So typically we say you want to make a building solar ready. And this is codified in certain states. Of California, it has to be true if you're doing new construction. It's not the case here, but it's a good idea. So there's little things like, even if you have a bunch of junk like your air vents and stuff spread out on your rooftop, whereas they could be, spaced in a certain way that allows the panels to be fit more easily, that can shave off a ton of solar, or rather, doing that correctly can create a lot of opportunity to put more solar up than you would have otherwise. Having it so that you have a conduit line from your meter, your energy infrastructure to the rooftop. So it's a straight line, you're not trying to snake this expensive cabling all through and knocking holes in walls and stuff. Making all that stuff available at the design phase, making sure you're roof oriented in a way that solar would be beneficial, rather than just it's on the north side of the building and it's not collecting as much. Those are the kind of things that really help make solar more financially successful, if you're doing it at the design phase. But that roof benefit, absolutely, if you're designing the roof to have a solar array on it and you're doing that reflective surface, you're doing the bifacial panels, like that, tax benefit definitely can be factored in. And I see will there be another round of applications? Maybe. The short answer. So we are, our goal or mission, being a nonprofit, we've had some foundation support to run this program over the next 2 years, which is really exciting. But part of that goal structure is that we hit a certain amount of unique communities over this time. And that means that like our first and foremost priority is like to hit those numbers, make sure we're touching as many communities as possible over the next 2 years. With that said, our first round was Meadville and the Triborough, the Millville, Sharpsburg, Etna, little communities outside of the city of Pittsburgh. I'm still getting applications through that program. We still try to work those folks in and work them individually. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging for us, and they're probably not going to be as beneficial to you as moving through this process together with these other organizations. But we'll definitely, if there's interest, like if this round goes well and there's interest and we have organizations clamoring, then we would definitely consider another round in the future.
We have a question regarding a business advantage of the, so I think we talked about net metering aggregation or the virtual net metering. So it says, can you speak to the business advantage of net metering within a 2-mile radius?
Yeah, great. Awesome question, Jack. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you brought that up. So when we talk about how solar works on commercial property or residential property, wherever, what's effectively happening is you're going to use a program that all the utilities are obliged to honor called net metering. Well, I should say all public utilities. If you're part of and this doesn't really apply to anybody here, but if you're part of like a rural energy co-op, they don't necessarily have to allow you net meter. But regardless, for everybody here, net metering is basically when your solar system is producing energy, regardless of whether or not you're consuming it, you will get the value of that energy. So when you're not consuming it, but it's still producing, it runs your meter backwards. So at the end of the year, what you consumed versus what you net produced beyond what you consumed in the moment is trued up by the utility company. So it actually takes place in May. You'll get a check if you've overproduced on what you spent. And that way, when we're sizing these solar installations, we don't have to worry about making it so big that it like way overproduces when it's not, or when it's relevant to you. Or like if you have a big system and you're not using energy at 4 o'clock when it's most productive, you're not losing the value of that. The really exciting thing is now, as of like the last 2 years through a state Supreme Court ruling, that process can happen within 2 miles, even if the solar installation is not on your facility. So if you have a field where you put the solar array up, it can run into a meter on that field, and then up to 2 miles away, that energy can be credited to a bill if you own both meters, right? And there's some ways to navigate that too. But so if you're a municipality, if you're an organization with a big campus, or you have multiple buildings, or you have all of your consumption is here, but a mile away is really where property would be, and you don't have to own the property, you could lease it. But there's a really good piece of property a mile away. Totally, we can make that work. You can put the solar where it makes sense to have the solar and credit it to the energy bill where the power is actually being consumed. So that's a really great tool that we have at our disposal. So even if you're like, oh, our roof's not great, but we have all this land, it's nearby. Ideally, it's right nearby, so it's very easy. But if it's within 2 miles, we can do it. And conversely, if you're a landowner, oh, sorry, Tony. If you're a landowner and you have property and you want to lease it, that can be benefit too, right? So you could potentially lease that land for an organization to fuel their systems.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate to for-profits that the net meter aggregation is available to anyone, but for-profit company businesses, the investment tax credit's 30%, and then there's a possible additional 30% bonus. Now, not everyone's going to be able to get all of those bonuses, but maybe you get an extra 10% or something. But bare minimum, if you include accelerated depreciation and your 30% tax credit, you're almost guaranteed. I don't want to say guaranteed, but bare minimum, you're going to get 50% plus of your electricity back in tax credits in the first year, right? So that's a huge bonus right there. Not to mention you have a stable electricity rate for 30 years or 30 plus years. And the electricity rate is going to be a lot lower than your utility rates, depending on the installation. But in general, you're going to have 30 years of cheap electricity, let's say, if you think about the initial cost and sort of distributing that over the total power produced over the array. So, I just have a residential setup on my house, but if you calculate the total production from my solar array and you were to take the cost of that system and divide it by the total production, I'm going to pay 6 cents or less, actually a little less than 6 cents per kilowatt hour for the next 30 years. It doesn't power my entire solar array, right? So about 20% of my solar array, so my home electricity is from utility. And for that electricity, I pay about 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's in 2023. So you can imagine in 2033, I'm going to be paying more than 20 cents per kilowatt hour and so on. So even right now, I'm paying less than half of the rate that I would for utility. So it's a great investment. I think, especially if you were to take out any sort of a loan, I think your payback should be within 1 year, no problem. You can imagine if you had a 30% down payment, you would get that back in the ITC credit alone. And even cash purchases, we're seeing payback periods of less than 7 years, right? So if you want to think of it that way, if you get a 7-year payback, you have free electricity for 23 years, right? So I don't know, however you want to think about the advantages there, but there are some really good long-term advantages.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say nowadays, depending on the situation, a 3-5 year ROI at a cash purchase is not totally out of bounds. I mean, 2 years ago, I would have said, well, that's going to be really hard. But now it's very easy to make that work, or it's very likely to make that work, I should say. And certainly, if you're using any kind of other financing tools, you can get that first year payback, which is incredible. So don't necessarily have to think about solar as it certainly has long-term value, and it has a lot more value as we go on, but it can be a short-term value add as well nowadays. All right, another good question on utility bills. What rates are needed to be included to do a fair comparison? Yeah, so this can get a little complicated if you're trying to look at your bill and do the analyzation. Your supply charge, first and foremost, is the first thing you're going to look at when you're offset. So on all your bills, it'll say you're either paying the default supply charge or you've signed up with a third-party supplier. So that immediately is a cost that would be defrayed by solar. There's also going to be some distribution charges associated with that. It's a little harder to pick out if you're not used to reading a bill. Fortunately, if you're in Duquesne or Penelec or Penn Power, those bills are a lot easier to read than some of the others. But there will be charges on your bill that'll have if you look at your bills, they'll show you how many kilowatt hours you've used this month, and that same number will appear in certain areas on your bill with, again, @ symbol before it, and there'll be some kind of charge that'll typically be in a very fractional amount, like it'll be like 0.00038 something, whatever. Those distribution charges all get added too. This is something that we would help you analyze, but if you want like a kind of really quick guesswork, supply charges are great because the distribution charges aren't necessarily enormous. Like they're still significant to making this calculus because you are going to offset them, but like 80% of what you would offset immediately you could pick out on your supply charge. And if you have a supplier, sometimes that'll appear in a different part of the bill. Some suppliers, if you're a commercial entity, will bill you separately and not have the supply charge on your utility bill. That's an easy thing to figure out. And if you're already an organization that does third-party supplying, then this is not totally out of normal experience for you. So you should be able to unpack this relatively easily. There's a thing, demand charge is a thing that can be affected by solar, but it is a little bit harder to calculate that without unpacking very, very, very fine detail your interval data. So like literally 15-minute interval data from the utility company. It's a thing we can do, but basically your demand charge it's not based on how much electricity you consume over time. It's based on how much electricity you consume any given bill period for 15 minutes at a time. So if you're an organization that suddenly spikes, if you're running a compressor or if you have AC come on and your solar is not, let's say it's cloudy for 15 minutes in a day that month, you might hit that demand charge. So we don't ever factor that in when we calculate the value of solar. Sometimes it's just a net benefit that happens. It's something that you can, if you're doing sophisticated demand response stuff, that you can figure out. But when we look at the value of solar, we're strictly looking at the offsetting the supply and distribution charges. And there's also a thing called a renewable energy credit that your solar installation will generate every megawatt hour of electricity produced in real time. You get credit for one solar renewable energy credit. And this is basically like a virtual currency that can be sold in exchange. And when you purchase solar installation, all of this stuff will be set up at the beginning of it, but these credits are used for organizations that want to claim that they're solar powered legally. You can sell those in the market, and then organizations or utilities are required to buy them at a certain rate. Right now in Pennsylvania, it's just shy of $40 per renewable energy credit. But if we had better solar policy in the state, it could go as high as $50, $60, $70. So, that's a thing to look out for. But those are the things we're looking at when you're trying to like quick, eyeball test how much money you're going to be able to save. Sorry, it's again the long answer. Increasingly, it's probably going to become obvious to you why we want to offer the service, because it is, somewhat nuanced and complex. But once you're into it, once you're starting to looking at it, once you have an eye for it, it becomes very easy, and then you get kind of excited to look at your bills and start pouring over all these little digits and figure out where your value is. Did I miss anything, Tony, that you think would be relevant there?
Yeah, I think, maybe the simplest way to think of it is, besides the demand charges, because like Leo said, these can be a little tricky, but if you just think of it in terms of you have a certain rate that you're paying for the electricity, might be a supply charge, you might say price to compare. That's a common one to look at. And then the other thing is the electricity gets delivered by places, by companies like G.E.T Light or Penn Power, and that's your distribution charge. So those two alone, like I said, on my house, it's about 16.5 cents, about 5.5 cents for the, about 6 cents for the distribution, and about almost 11 cents for the electricity itself. So that's what those are the two items that you can do a pretty good estimate just with those two.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah, any other questions? I'm trying to think if I have anything else to add. You mentioned the renewable energy credits Leo mentioned are called SREC, solar renewable energy credits, and there's a whole market online. But you can so like my little solar array produces almost about a megawatt hour in the summer per month, right? So if I go on the market, I can see the market rates, and right now they're hovering around $40. So for every megawatt hour that my solar array produces, I will get $40 back, and it quite literally hits my bank account within a few days. So I've signed up with. There's a number of different SREC brokers, but you sign an aggregation agreement, and essentially they monitor your production for you, and then whenever you hit that megawatt hour, they sell the credit on the market. So another way to bring in some income from your solar array.
Yeah, and I'll go back to that CCAC installation, just give you a perspective. So this, is a relatively large commercial installation, though, if we have any folks representing like a manufacturer on the call, like hitting this size of solar system would be no problem for you if you're operating out of like a large manufacturing facility or warehouse. But this generates about 550 of those, or maybe it's a little bit more closer to 600, depending on the productivity of the system. But between 550, 600 of those annually. So at $40 a pop, that's not an insignificant amount of additional revenue that is supplied by your system. And again, we have states like Massachusetts where those things are worth $250, because the state policy has a very high solar requirement, and there's not a ton of solar up relative to the demand. So you increase that demand, you increase the obligation for the utility companies to provide renewable energy into the grid, and you increase the value of the solar renewable energy credits. And so that's, again, it's another thing that Solar Center is involved in and folks are involved in, that could happen at the state level and significantly increase the value of the solar.
Yeah, and I guess, Leo, I actually didn't think about this earlier. The nonprofit could take advantage of selling their SRECs also.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a nonprofit would have a 30% cash back the SRECs, which are, that $40 amounts to about 4 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on how you want to look at it. And then you have potential loans and other bonuses the bonuses are all new to the Inflation Reduction Act. But, yeah, so there's a few different things.
Like what percentage of projects end up with batteries?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, batteries have not necessarily been a good component to include strictly for finance. So we're talking under certain conditions, it makes sense. So one, batteries are really great if your objective is to have resiliency and to have the ability to move through energy disruption well, right? So like if you have battery backup, you're less susceptible to losing your power. You can store energy and offset it. If you're a large facility that consumes energy during peak hours, so if you're consuming energy when it's most expensive between 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, especially during the summer, batteries are starting to make a little bit more sense financially because you can shift your loads. You can be generating that solar energy, pumping it right back into the utility at its highest cost, the highest price to compare, and then discharge your batteries when when you would be consuming it and it would be expensive to you. So I know it's a little complicated maybe to understand in one sentence, but basically batteries are best used for either like resiliency projects, or if you are a very high energy user that's consuming energy, especially if you consume it off peak, like a school facility is really great because schools are winding down at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. If you're running air compressors, you're running AC, you're not going to be doing that between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock as much. So those institutions can generate their solar and sell it back at the highest value, and batteries allow you to facilitate that. Of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, there are incentives for batteries. And increasingly, the cost of batteries is becoming more digestible, but right now they're expensive relative to the value they provide on a lot of solar installations when you can just net meter to get that aggregated value. So from a purely financial standpoint, not a lot of solar installations use batteries these days, unless they're trying to hit one of those two very specific.
Okay, but that's something that it sounds like you guys have the wherewithal to do that kind of analysis, because we're a commercial project I'm thinking about is fairly large, power usage. In fact, so much so that we work with Duquesne Light in the summer. We actually curtail power sometimes when they know they're going to be,
okay.
There's like 3 or 4 days in a year in the summer. In fact, we just had one during the cold spell in late December where we actually curtailed power because they were needing it so bad. So, and we get a big credit for that when we do that. But it gets complex to understand that. And the question is, well, would a battery help? Well, and the other thing that's going on is we have a demand meter, right? And you already mentioned that, the demand you can save a lot if you can shave the tip off the demand. But to do that on a analysis up front on one of these, it's mind blowing. If that's something you guys can help out with, that'd be monster.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly something within our wheelhouse. And if the specifics of it are not exactly what we would be familiar with, we work with some technical advisors, and Tony's worked with us too on projects like that, or has worked on projects like that, and we've talked about working with Tony on it. So there are things that we could definitely provide in that space. But it sounds like when you're looking at your energy at that sophistication, it does actually make a lot of sense for you to look at what solar plus battery could do. Large institutions, organizations have a good grip on how they consume energy and how that relates to demand and on-time use. Batteries do make a lot of sense to at least explore, for sure. And a lot of solar developers have that sophistication too. So it's not necessarily something that you strictly need the PA Solar Center to do, but we'd be happy to engage in that. But if you were going to pursue solar outside of this conversation, there are a lot of organizations that understand that and can help you.
Okay, great, thanks.
One little addition to that, I know this is a bit nuanced, but if your business is looking at potentially looking at diesel backup generators or something like that, you could replace that with batteries and solar, right? So, I don't know if anyone's looking to replace their backup energy, but a battery could take that place, especially with the solar.
Generator that's a fully, full-blown system. So again, that's complexity that we have to sort of analyze. So with your expertise, that might make a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring. We're happy to take a look at it. Okay, any other questions from folks on the call? And if you don't want to address it right now, by all means, email me. We can set up time to talk, but it's a great opportunity if you have a question for other folks to learn, if you do want to ask them. Oh, yeah, Jack pointed out next step. So if you are interested at all in pursuing solar, or at least carrying this conversation further, I highly recommend that you either email me directly at leo@pasolarcenter.com, super easy. Again, I'll send this PDF out to everybody so you have it, and then we'll post this video. Or you can go to our website and click through the Get Solar McCandless links to get to our application. You can fill out the application. I think that probably easiest PDFs, the probably easiest thing to do is if you're familiar with filling out PDF forms, or you could just print it out, fill it out by hand, and send it to us digitally. There's that pre-qualification survey that they'll be up right on that link, so you could just plug your information in super quickly. Then I could at least take a look at your high-level solar potential. All of those things would be a great next step to just get on our radar, have a conversation with us, and then we'll make sure that we have everything we need from you by January 30th. Don't mind getting applications on that day because it's a due date, but if you could do it earlier, you could get in touch with us sooner rather than later, then it's a lot easier to unpack what you have going on and kind of plan ahead. But yeah, I think those are all really good next steps. Very easy to contact us. You can click through our website. There's plenty of ways you accidentally can get a hold of me there. You can also call me. I always include my cell phone number, so I'm happy to take calls.
Hey, Leo, real quick, you mentioned the application. Do you want to give an idea of time commitment? This isn't like a 3-hour long,
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah,
it's probably a 15-minute, I don't know, maybe 10-minute application. It's not.
Yeah, if you've ever filled out like a Department of Energy grant, it's nothing like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it'd probably be better characterized as a survey. We're really we need the essential information, like what's the physical address that the solar needs to go up so we can actually look at it. But it's largely just general questions about your roof age, whether or not you have the ability to finance things, what you're interested in exploring, why you want to pursue solar in the first place. That's always helpful for us to know, because if you're interested purely in economics, that's great. It's a good thing to do, but it's good to know that that's your main benefit. If you have other goals you're looking for, if you're a nonprofit and you have environmental goals, then when we talk about those SRECs, you might not want to be selling those. You want to retire those and claim that renewable energy value. So it's just basically a questionnaire, so we know who you are and what you're trying to accomplish by submitting your application. Again, it's not a contract, it's not a commitment in any capacity. Obviously, we want you to apply if you are committed to at least exploring. Like, what I'm really asking of you is to go through this process with me, and you get the proposals. You don't want to go solar, that's great, that's fine, that's totally valid experience to have, but at least commit to doing that with me so that we can get that information to you and you can make an informed decision. But after that, do what you will, and we'll certainly help you beyond that point, if you need the help and you want the continued support, but you're not under any obligation. Okay, well, one last opportunity to ask a question, and if not, we will get out about 13 minutes early.
Hey, Leo, I just wanted to say something real quick. This is Brian O'Malley, the town manager from McCandless. I wanted to thank Tony for putting this together, and the members of the Environmental Action Committee for doing this for our residents and our business owners. So just wanted to say thank you for that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I second that. Tony, you're awesome. Thank you so much. And Jack, I'm not just Tony, Jack has done an enormous amount of work too. Jack's incredible. Judy, I don't think's on the call. The whole squad has been amazing. It's been very easy to work with you, and it's taken a lot off of my plate, which is always always very grateful for.
Well, and thanks to Brian too for the support from McCandless, right? We couldn't have done it without that support, and Jack has been a rock star in this outreach as well. So, and obviously, we appreciate everyone coming to join us, learning more about solar. Happy to answer questions, have a conversation, or even just chat over a cup of coffee or something like that. But as you can tell, I think a number of us are pretty passionate about it. We hope that you at least give it a solid consideration.
Hey, I want to thank you guys as well. I've been involved with solar, at least at home here, for about 3 or 4 years. And historically, it was a real workout to get any progress, meaningful progress from legitimate contractors. And what you guys sort of outlined today is like a major shift in how straightforward this process can be. I've got a ton of questions, but they're really project specific, Leo. So I'm probably going to start you sending some emails.
Yeah, please do. I'd love to talk about it. That's really wonderful. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not been easy in the past, maybe, to do this. I've heard that before from folks very recently, that like, I can't get anybody to call me back to explore solar. That, believe me, and part of it is like there's a lot of business and not enough organizations to go around, frankly. And so that's one of our goals, is to maybe create more opportunities there. But we'll make sure you get your proposals and everything happens on a timely manner. Very good. Well, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Tony, Jack. Thank you, Brian, and everybody else on the call. This is awesome. Again, email me, call me, check out our website. We're happy to take any kind of questions and to talk about, getting you your solar potential. But I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day and have a lovely weekend.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Leo. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for keeping us on track too there.
Yeah, wonderful questions, Jack. All right, see you, everybody.
Leo, you saw the message from Paul about the HOA. I'm not sure. It looked like they had some land. Did you see that one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Shot some mention about emailing me, but I definitely want to talk about that. That's really exciting.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I guess that would almost be community solar, though, right? Or unless they had a individual, like if they built a large array and they had an individual meter for each home at the array,